"You don't belong here, Catherine. Your mother wouldn't have wanted you at her funeral." That was the first thing my father said to me in 15 years. No greeting, no pause, just a sentence that felt like a slap across the face delivered in the quiet morning light outside the brick chapel where they were holding her memorial. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, still in my class of uniform, the heels of my Oxfords rooted to the concrete. My hand clutched the small black clutch that held her old rosary, the one she used to keep on the kitchen windowsill when I was little. I'd carried it with me for 3 tours. I hadn't even made it to the church steps when he intercepted me. Still broad-shouldered, still that same hard-set jawline he always turned on me when I said anything he didn't agree with. Only now his temples were white, and his posture leaned heavier to the left than I remembered. But his voice hadn't changed. Cold final like a closed door I'd been trying to open since I was 17. He didn't even look at my uniform, didn't ask when I flew in, didn't ask how I was holding up. He didn't even ask if I'd seen Mom before she passed. The answer to that last one was no. The last time I saw my mother was the day I left for basic. She'd cried so hard she couldn't speak. I hugged her tight in the driveway, promised I'd write, told her I'd make her proud. She never told me not to go. She never told me I wasn't welcome, but my father did. That same day, he said I was throwing my life away, that no man would ever marry a woman in uniform, that I was disgracing the family. I still remember his exact words. "You'll come crawling back. Don't expect this door to be open when you do." He meant it. From that moment on, I wasn't invited home for the holidays. I wasn't told when my brother got married. I didn't even know Mom had gotten sick until it was too late. And now here I was 15 years later, back in this town, back on the street, back at this church I hadn't stepped foot in since high school, just to be told again that I didn't belong. But this time, something inside me didn't flinch. I stood tall, I squared my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I didn't apologize for existing. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I came to honor Mom, whether you like it or not." He didn't respond. He just stepped aside and muttered, "Do what you want, but don't expect anyone in there to pretend you're still part of this family." And with that, he turned his back on me again. But what neither of us knew was who else would be walking through that door behind me. The chapel doors creaked softly as I pushed them open. I hadn't even stepped fully inside when I felt the silence shift. It was like walking into a room that had just been vacuum sealed. Heads turned, some quickly looked away. Others didn't bother pretending. I recognized maybe a third of the faces, church ladies with their pursed lips and gloved hands. My father's co-workers, my brother Benjamin and his wife sitting in the front row with their 2 perfectly dressed boys. All of them had aged 15 years just like me. Only difference, they'd aged together in potlucks, in backyard BBQs, in hospital waiting rooms. Me, I aged through deployments. I didn't expect anyone to stand, but I didn't expect the icy stares either. You'd think I was the one who'd left Mom, not the one who wrote her every month, even when the letters went unanswered. I walked down the center aisle, steady, quiet. Mom's photo was placed right by the altar. Her eyes were crinkled in a smile. I remembered holding a tray of lemon bars, her apron still dusted with flour. My knees wobbled at the sight of it. I found an empty seat in the back row. No one slid over. No one even nodded. Not even Uncle David, who used to sneak me candy at family cookouts. I stayed there, hands folded in my lap. Not speaking, not crying, just listening. My father gave the first speech. He started with her devotion to the community, her garden club, her homemade jam, her loyalty to the church. Then he shifted to the family legacy. The Campbells, as he always said, builders of things that last. He talked about my brother Benjamin's construction company, about the grandkids. He never said my name. It wasn't omission. It was a razor. He closed his speech with a quiver in his voice. Eleanor believed in tradition and strength through unity. She knew what mattered, and with that he stepped down. I could feel my lungs pushing against my ribs like my own body didn't want me in this room. I thought about standing saying something, but before I could even decide, the next speaker was already walking up. A woman I didn't know from the church choir. She said Mom made her feel seen, that Eleanor Campbell never judged anyone. I stared at the altar, blinking hard. I remembered how Mom always knew when I was scared, even when I pretended not to be. How she mailed me hand lotion during winter training, saying just because you're tough doesn't mean your skin has to be. How she watched CNN every night while I was deployed just to stay close to where you are, baby. But none of that was spoken here. None of that was a part of the version they chose to remember. They buried her before the service even began. Not her body, her truth. And as I sat there trying to stay composed, something in my chest cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, like a thin fracture in glass that would spread no matter how still you try to stay. And I realized I hadn't just lost my mother. I'd lost the only person who ever tried to stitch me back into this family. And now they were letting the thread rot. After the service, I didn't rush to the front. I stood back, letting the crowd peel away in waves. Hugs, whispers, pats on shoulders. No one turned to me. I might as well have been the janitor. When the chapel emptied enough for me to approach the casket, I stepped forward. There was a bouquet of peonies on top, her favorite, tied with a lace ribbon I knew came from our old kitchen curtains. The curtains we made together one summer when I was 12. She'd let me use a sewing machine even when Dad said I jammed the needle. I rested my hand on the wood lightly, just enough to feel that it was real. Just enough to accept that the last time I heard her voice through a shaky voicemail while I was stationed in Colorado really was the last. Hey baby, I know we haven't talked much, but I'm proud of you. That was it. I whispered back now, barely moving my lips. I came, Mom. You knew I would. Then I turned, and there he was, my father, standing near the side exit with a tight jaw and eyes sharp as stone. Next to him was my brother Benjamin, who couldn't even meet my gaze. I walked up anyway. Dad, I said quietly. He didn't respond, just stepped slightly sideways as if to block my path further. I came to say goodbye. His voice was low but cold. I told you this wasn't your place. My spine straightened on instinct. She was my mother. He didn't flinch. She was your mother when you were around. You chose something else. Benjamin finally looked up, then muttering, Maybe this isn't the time, Catherine. I looked at him. This man I used to play flashlight tag with. You think I wanted to miss 15 years of birthdays, of holidays? I wasn't on vacation, Ben? Dad scoffed. You left. You stayed gone. You made your choice. There it was, the sentence that tried to erase everything else. He didn't care that I served 3 tours, that I made it to Lieutenant Colonel at 32, that I carried trauma on my back like it was standard gear. All he saw was that I didn't come home for Thanksgiving. I studied his face. That same stern expression I remembered from high school when I told him I didn't want to be an engineer like Benjamin. When I said I got accepted into ROTC, when I cut my hair, packed my bag, and left that house without looking back. He hadn't changed, just grayer, more sunken, but the bitterness still intact. I didn't come here for you. I said, my voice low but firm. I came for her. I turned to go, but he stopped me again, this time with words that struck deep. Just don't cause a scene. You're not on base now. And that's when I realized he never once asked what I did in the Army. He never cared that I made rank, never asked what I'd seen, what I'd survived. To him, I was still just a daughter who disobeyed. And in that moment, the grief shifted. It morphed into something else. Not rage, not even disappointment. It became clarity. I looked him in the eye squarely. I'm not here to cause a scene, but I won't shrink for your comfort. He blinked. I walked past him without another word leaving him, with silence that, for the first time, didn't belong to him. The reception was held at the old community hall down the street, same place where they threw my 6th birthday party, and later my high school graduation send-off, though no one had known I'd enlisted 2 weeks earlier. I walked in quietly, familiar faces, turned, some tilted their heads. Others whispered. A few nodded politely like I was a coworker crashing awake, not a daughter burying her mother. No one offered me a seat. I found one near the back, a folding chair half bent next to a dusty window. I sat alone. The slideshow played up front. Photos of mom with dad, mom with Benjamin, even some with Benjamin's kids. None with me. A hollow smile tugged at my lips. Not a single picture. Not from my basic training graduation when she'd flown out alone just to see me march. Not from the few weekends I got leave when we'd secretly meet at a motel cafe between counties so Dad wouldn't find out. She'd cut them. I knew she had, but they weren't here. Probably thrown out with the rest of what she left behind. And yet I didn't feel forgotten. I felt erased. At the buffet line, I reached for a plate just as a woman I vaguely remembered from church stepped in. "Oh, Catherine, I didn't recognize you. It's been what, decades?" I nodded. She smiled nervously. "So still doing the Army thing?" "The Army thing," I repeated. "Yeah, we heard you were abroad. Your father doesn't say much, but you know how he is always proud, just doesn't show it." I stared at her for a long second. "Actually," I said softly, "he told me not to come today." Her eyes widened, then flicked behind me. I turned. Dad was standing at the far end of the room, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. Polished suit, confident stance, didn't look like he belonged in our little town. The man glanced my way and then he started walking toward me. Dad tried to stop him, said something under his breath, but the man kept coming. When he reached me, he extended his hand. "Lieutenant Colonel Campbell." I blinked. "Yes." He smiled. "I'm Marcus Riley, Director of Engineering at Pinnacle Defense Solutions. I work with your father." That's when I realized it. That man was my father's boss. Marcus glanced over his shoulder at Dad, then looked back at me. "He's mentioned you, you know. Not much, but enough for me to be curious. Didn't expect to see you today. I thought you were deployed." "I was. I just got back." He nodded. "Well, it's good you came." And then louder enough for the room to hush. "We could use someone like you on the Apollo project. Always room for someone who understands both logistics and command structure." Dad's face went pale. Marcus wasn't just making conversation. He was offering me something in front of everyone. He turned to Dad. "You didn't tell me your daughter was Lieutenant Colonel Campbell. I assumed she was still enlisted." My father didn't answer. The room was still, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt seen. Not by them, by me. I didn't touch the plate in my hands. I stood there for another minute long after Marcus Riley moved on to mingle, leaving behind a silence I could only describe as clearing. Dad wouldn't look at me. He stayed across the room, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, staring at the wall like it held answers he hadn't found in 15 years. Eventually, I slipped out of the hall and into the side garden. Same maple tree, same bench, same silence I remembered from being 10 sitting there, while Mom argued inside about why I wanted to join ROTC instead of yearbook club. I sat again. The ache in my chest wasn't from grief anymore. It was the kind of hollow that only years of being invisible could carve. "Lieutenant Colonel Campbell," someone said softly behind me. I turned. It was Aunt Sarah, Mom's younger sister. She looked older, but the kindness in her face hadn't changed. "You don't have to stay," she added. I didn't answer. She sat beside me. "Your mom told me what happened. With your dad. With Benjamin." That name Benjamin, the golden son who got the house, the business, the sympathy, the same one who once told me to stop acting like I had trauma because I joined the Army by choice. I was 19, he was 26, and Dad had nodded in agreement. I took a slow breath. Did she ever regret anything? Sarah looked straight ahead. She regretted not fighting harder for you, said so many times she wished she'd gone after you when you left. But your father, he said you needed to learn respect. I looked down at my hands. So she gave up. No, Sarah said. She gave in. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a while. The wind moved through the trees. A cardinal landed on the bench's armrest, flicked its wings and darted off again. Then Sarah reached into her purse. She made me promise, she said, to give this to you if you ever came back. She handed me a thin envelope, faded worn. My name, Catherine, written in Mom's handwriting, still round, still careful. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter 3 pages front and back. I read the first few lines. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to hold your hand when you came home. And I'm sorry for all the years I let silence answer when I should have been the one to speak first. I folded it carefully. I couldn't read the rest. Not yet. Sarah didn't pressure me. She just patted my hand and stood up. Take your time, honey. And for once, no one asked me to explain my uniform. No one asked why I came. For the first time since I'd stepped off that plane, someone had given me something real. A reason, a truth, a memory I could keep. And I held it close. I found Dad standing in the corner of the reception hall near the exit, nursing a cup of coffee. He clearly wasn't drinking. His back was stiff, his shoulders squared like a man waiting for a punishment that never came. He saw me coming and immediately looked past me. I didn't stop walking until I stood right in front of him. Did you know she wrote me? He blinked. What? Mom, she wrote me a letter. She gave it to Aunt Sarah to pass on, just in case. He stared at me tight-lipped. I read the first page. I said she apologized not just for the years of silence, but for letting you decide who got to matter in this family. Catherine, he said low, this isn't the time. Of course it's not, I cut in, because you spent your whole life picking times that never come. There was never a good time to talk, never a right time to visit, never a day you'd say I was worth sitting at the table again. He didn't answer, so I leaned in quieter. But it was the right time to tell me not to come to her funeral. His face flushed. I never said. You said it in your silence. You said it when you gave Benjamin the eulogy slot and not once asked if I wanted to speak. He shifted, but I didn't back off. You know what hurts the most, I asked. Not the years, not even her dying without us speaking again. What hurts is knowing you still thought you had the right to manage my grief. He clenched his jaw. You left, he muttered. You chose the army over your family. No, I said steady. I chose the army because I needed structure. Because every time I tried to be part of this family, I got shoved aside so your golden son could have the spotlight. I left because I couldn't survive in a house where love came with conditions. He looked like he wanted to argue. But then Marcus Riley reappeared. He walked up to us slowly, and I noticed Dad's body language shift. Defensive, smaller. Everything all right here? Marcus asked lightly, though his eyes were sharp. Dad forced a thin smile. Yes, sir, just talking with my daughter. Marcus looked at me. I didn't realize your daughter was Lieutenant Colonel Campbell. Quite the resume. Dad glanced at me like he'd heard the title for the first time. Colonel, not girl, not disappointment, not stranger. And then Marcus added almost casually. I read your commendation last month. You're the one overseeing the Pacific cybersecurity protocols? I nodded once. Yes, sir. Marcus looked back at Dad. I should say you raised a fine officer, one of the sharpest we've got, but you probably already knew that. Dad didn't respond. His lips parted, then closed again. And for the first time in my life, I saw him caught between two worlds. The one where he could pretend I was a mistake, and the one where everyone else knew better. Marcus gave my shoulder a light squeeze. If you ever want to talk about joint initiatives, my door's open. Then he walked away. Dad still didn't speak. I waited, but he said nothing. And I realized in that moment that I'd been waiting 15 years for an apology that wasn't coming. Not because he didn't feel sorry, but because admitting I was worthy would mean rewriting the version of me he'd told himself was easier to reject. So I finally said the words he'd never expected. "I'm leaving." His brows furrowed. "You just got here." "No," I said. "I got here 15 years ago and I'm done waiting to be seen." I turned and walked toward the door. This time he didn't follow and I didn't look back. I stepped out into the afternoon air, the late autumn sun already dipping behind the trees. There was a quietness to it. Not peace exactly, just absence. I walked toward the rental car parked at the edge of the cemetery lot, expecting silence. But behind me, I heard my name, Catherine. It was Benjamin. His voice still carried that edge, the same one he'd used when we were kids. Half superior, half territorial. I turned slowly. He jogged toward me, tugging at the collar of his suit like it didn't quite fit him anymore. "I saw what you did in there," he said, coming to a stop. "That stunt with Dad's boss." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean answering a question? You made him look like an idiot." I exhaled steady. "No, Benjamin, he did that himself. I just stopped pretending he hadn't." He crossed his arms. "You've been gone nearly 2 decades. Mom got sick and you couldn't even—" "I didn't know," I said quietly. "You made sure I didn't." He flinched. I kept my voice level. "She wrote me. You intercepted it." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Catherine, you wouldn't have. You didn't get to decide that." I stepped closer. She was still my mother. His jaw tightened. "You always thought you were better than us, running off hiding behind uniforms and medals." "I didn't run," I said. "I rebuilt." I looked him in the eye. "You had every chance to bring me into the loop. Every phone number, every email. You all sent me nothing but silence, and now you're mad I didn't grieve on your schedule." He went quiet. Then with forced calm, he said, "You don't get to rewrite history just because some general likes you." I almost laughed. "That's rich coming from you." I stepped back. "You know, I always thought one day maybe you'd grow out of whatever Dad infected you with. But now I see you like being the chosen one too much." He shifted, uncomfortable. "You're not a victim, Benjamin. You're an accomplice." That finally hit. He looked like he wanted to shout, maybe cry, but instead he said, "She forgave you." "Do you know?" In the end, I nodded slowly. "I forgave her too. I just never said it out loud." Then I looked toward the hill, towards where her name was already etched into the stone. She deserved better from both of us. For once, he didn't argue. He just stood there, deflated older. I turned back to the car, and for the second time that day, I walked away. But this time, I carried something heavier than silence. A beginning. I got back to Fort Evans just after midnight. The base always looked different at night, quieter, like the steel softened when no one was looking. But something in me stayed sharp. I hadn't unpacked. Just tossed the funeral program on the counter, still folded. Mom's name stared up at me. Eleanor Campbell. It hit harder than I expected. I thought I was fine, composed, controlled. But as I sat there staring at her name, I realized I hadn't actually breathed since the service. Not really. The next morning, I showed up early for briefing. Major Evans noticed. "You're back already?" he asked, flipping through reports. I nodded. Didn't take long. He looked up. "How was it?" I didn't answer. He studied me for a moment. "You want to talk about it, Lieutenant Colonel?" I shook my head. "You sure?" he said. "You're running on fumes. You haven't blinked since you walked in." I gave a tight smile. "I'm good." He leaned back. "Look, I get it. Command doesn't come with space for grieving. But that doesn't mean grief won't show up anyway." That stopped me. He wasn't wrong. It had shown up in the tremble in my left hand when I held the coffee, in the way I couldn't remember if I'd eaten the day before in the dream I had on the flight back when Mom was alive, but no one would let me in the house. You can't compartmentalize everything forever, Catherine, he added gently. I closed the file I'd barely read. I know. There was a long silence. Finally, I said, my father told me not to come to her funeral. Evans didn't flinch. Why? I stared down at the table. Because I left. Because I stopped playing their game. Because I chose something they couldn't control. He nodded slowly. That's the thing about families like that. They don't care what uniform you wear. They care about whether you still obey. I looked up. He met my gaze evenly. But you went anyway. I did. And you stood tall. I did. That's more than most can say. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my face still. Evans pushed a folder toward me. Take the day. I already reassigned morning ops. I hesitated. I don't need... You do, he said firmly. Go home. Grieve or don't, but don't pretend. I took the file, stared at it. Then slowly I nodded. As I walked out of the room, I didn't feel lighter, just slightly more real. It was the first time someone had looked at me, not as Lieutenant Colonel Campbell, not as a disappointment, not as a liability, just as a daughter who lost her mother. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mom's eyes during my last video call with her. How tired they looked, how quiet she had gone near the end. There was something I kept circling back to, but never let myself fully land on. I got up, poured myself a glass of water I wouldn't drink, then walked to the file box I kept on the bottom shelf of my bedroom closet. It was metal heavy, labeled private, in my own handwriting from 10 years ago. I hadn't opened it in a long time. The first layer held accommodations, deployment photos, old letters from my first stationing overseas stuff I'd meant to archive properly, but never had time for. Then I saw it, an envelope tucked beneath a leather-bound planner, cream-colored handwritten. The flap still sealed, to Catherine, for when you're ready, Mom. My chest tightened. I didn't remember when she'd given it to me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she sent it through Aunt Emily that last Christmas, the one I didn't come home for. I sat down on the floor and stared at it. Then I opened it. Her handwriting was neat, slanted, familiar. I read it slowly. Catherine, I know you think I chose silence. I didn't. I chose what wouldn't get you hurt. Your father never forgave me for backing your enlistment. He said you'd leave and never come back. I told him that's exactly why I had to let you go. I couldn't protect you from his bitterness, but I could protect you from his grip. I watched you walk into your own life, and I have never, not for a second, been anything but proud. If one day you come home and I'm no longer there, I need you to know you were never the one who left. He was. I love you, Mom. By the end, my hands were trembling. I had waited 15 years for her to say that. And now it came. Too late to answer, too late to call, but somehow right on time for my heart. I folded the letter back with care, not reverence, but clarity. I had spent half my life wondering if I was wrong for leaving. Now I knew she saw me, even when she couldn't say it out loud, even when he filled the silence with his own narrative. That truth didn't erase the pain, but it cut through the lie. And for the first time since the funeral, I slept. 2 days after I read Mom's letter, I requested emergency leave. I didn't tell anyone why, not my CO, not even Lena, my aide, just that I needed 3 days back in Austin and I'd handle travel personally. I landed on a Sunday evening. The air smelled like pine and memory. The house I grew up in looked exactly the same from the outside, except the porch swing was gone, and Mom's rose bushes were dead. I stood at the gate for a long moment, unsure if I'd knock. Then I remembered Dad had made it clear. I wasn't welcome, so I didn't knock. I walked around the back, slipped in through the garage. The key code hadn't changed in 15 years. The hallway lights were off. The dining room looked like no one had touched it in weeks. Mail stacked in a corner. A crusted casserole dish on the counter. It smelled like grief and cheap cologne. I stood there listening for footsteps. None. Only then did I move toward the study. Dad's office, his kingdom. The door creaked the way I remembered. The same creaky floorboard under the second step in. His desk was cluttered but not locked. In the top drawer, third file back, I found it. A sealed brown envelope, legal stationery, last will and testament. Eleanor Campbell. The seal was unbroken. The air left my lungs. He hadn't opened it. Not even after the funeral, which meant what? That he never submitted it to probate. That everything Mom had written was still unread, untouched. That letter had a date 7 months before she passed. I turned the envelope over and saw her handwriting again. To be read by Catherine Campbell, only. I froze. Only me. I took a deep breath, steeled my hand, slipped it inside my coat pocket, and left the house the way I came. No confrontation, not yet. This time I had more than emotion. I had paper, and it was going to speak louder than his version of history ever had. The will was dated, signed, notarized, everything in order. Mom had left me the house, not my father, not jointly sole ownership. She also left a letter to the court explaining why. The words were steady, measured, but they bled truth. My husband, William, has made it clear over the years that he no longer sees value in our daughter, Catherine. I want her to know in writing that I always did. I sat in the courthouse parking lot for 20 minutes before I walked in. The probate clerk raised an eyebrow when I handed her the sealed envelope. I was told this was never filed, I said evenly. But it's valid. She took it carefully, glancing at the date and signatures. It is, she said. I'll notify the family attorney. Family. That word had always felt heavy. I wasn't sure I belonged under it anymore. Still, I did everything by the book. I sent a formal letter to Dad's attorney informing him I'd submitted Eleanor Campbell's final will to probate. No drama, no threats, just paper and silence. It took less than 48 hours for the storm to hit. My phone rang at 6:12 a.m. I was already on base. Catherine, he barked. What the hell do you think you're doing? It was the first time Dad had called me in 15 years. No hello, no acknowledgement of the funeral, just anger. I kept my voice calm. I'm following Mom's wishes. You didn't open her will, William. I did. You broke into my house. It's not your house anymore, I interrupted, and I used the same code that's been there since I was 13. If you never changed it, that's not my fault. He went quiet. Then cold and low, he said, You think anyone's going to believe your version of her wishes? I paused and smiled. I don't need anyone to believe me. I have her words signed, notarized, and soon recorded with the county. I hung up first. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of 15 years finally shifting. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation. It was printed on ivory cardstock with gold foil edging, celebrating 40 years of distinguished service. William Campbell, Director of Field Operations, Global Logistics. I stared at the envelope like it had personally insulted me. Not only had my father told me I wasn't welcome at my mother's funeral, now he expected me to watch him be celebrated. At the bottom in small print was the RSVP contact, Caroline Davis, Executive Assistant to CEO Global Logistics. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the return address, the regional HQ. I took a breath. Then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I sent in a formal RSVP, yes +1. I didn't tell anyone who I was bringing, just that I'd be attending. The gala was held at a private event center downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, live string quartet waiters gliding by with champagne flutes and crab cakes. I wore my full dress uniform, medals, polished shoes, military posture. As I walked in, heads turned, but not because they knew me, because I didn't look like someone you could ignore, and I wasn't planning to be. I spotted my father near the stage charcoal suit, that same stiff posture he always used when trying to impress. He was laughing with 2 men in tailored blazers when I walked past. He didn't see me, but his boss did. James Harrison, CEO, late 50s, tall, sharp, with a politician's smile. He blinked when he saw my name tag, then stood up. Lieutenant Colonel Campbell. The room shifted. My father turned around, and the color drained from his face. Harrison offered his hand, then waved to the crowd. Everyone, I want to introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Campbell, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 22 years of service. And if I may, daughter of the Knight's honoree. A few scattered claps, then more than silence. William tried to recover. He gave a forced chuckle. Well, we didn't know you were coming, Catherine. I met his eyes, steady, controlled. I was invited. He opened his mouth, but before he could twist it into some patronizing remark, I turned to Mr. Harrison. Actually, sir, I have something I'd like to say. I walked up to the podium, not rushed, not dramatic, just quiet certainty. Then I pulled out a single sheet of paper. My mother, Eleanor Campbell, passed away 3 weeks ago. I wasn't informed by my father. I found out through a former neighbor. There was a ripple of tension, but that's not why I'm speaking tonight. I held up the paper. This is her will filed last month with probate court. She left me the family home. Not my father, not jointly. Just me. Gasps, whispers. I continued. She did it because she knew he wouldn't let me come home. She knew that even in death, he would try to erase me. I looked at my father. He failed, and I stepped off the stage. He didn't follow me, not even a word. But I saw the CEO's eyes on him, and I knew the real consequence wouldn't come from me. It would come from the people who had just seen the truth, unfiltered, undeniable. My father could bury my mother without me, but he couldn't bury who I'd become. I didn't stay for the cake, didn't wait for speeches or long goodbyes. After stepping off that stage, I nodded politely to Mr. Harrison, thanked him for the invitation, and walked out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet. My heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks on a sentence I finally got to finish. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my temporary address, my base housing in Virginia. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. It was from my father. I stared at it for a long time, then I opened it. Catherine, you embarrassed me. You made a scene. You made people talk. I don't know what you were trying to prove, but I suppose you got what you wanted. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he did. No mention of mom, just wounded pride wrapped in bitterness. I folded the letter back in half and tossed it in the recycling bin. A week later, I flew back to Ohio. I hadn't returned since I was 18. Not for holidays, not for leave, not for anything. But now the house on Elm Street was legally mine. I didn't go inside immediately. I stood in the driveway for hours, just breathing. The rose bushes were still there. Overgrown, wilted, but alive like something waiting for a second chance. Inside, everything smelled like her. Lavender sachets tucked into drawers, a ceramic jar of flour on the kitchen counter, the old wooden spoon still stained from decades of Sunday dinners. Her sweater was still draped over the arm of the recliner. I sat down slowly, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel all of it. Not regret, not revenge, just presence. I was home. I didn't call him, not after the funeral, not after the gala, not after the letter. But 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail. Catherine, it's your father. I don't expect a call back. Just thought you should know. They're asking questions at work about why I didn't include you in the funeral. Why Eleanor changed the will. I don't know what you told them, but whatever this is, it's gone too far. He ended with a sigh, not one of sorrow, one of inconvenience. And that's when I knew he still hadn't learned a thing. I didn't return the call. I returned to the garden instead. It took a few weeks to clear out the weeds, trim the branches, reseed the bare patches, but I liked the rhythm of it. Hands in soil, sweat on my back, wind in my ears. I even found Mom's old garden journal, her scribbled notes about tomato varieties and rose pruning techniques. She had dreams for this place, and now so did I. The last thing I unpacked was a shadow box. It held my medals, my commissioning photo, and a small laminated note that my mother had mailed me the day I made captain. Catherine, I know your father doesn't say it, but I'm proud of you. I always have been. Love, Mom. I placed it on the mantle above the fireplace, not to make a statement, not to invite anyone's validation, but because it belonged here in her home. In my home, sometimes people ask if I'll ever reconcile with him. I don't know, but I know this. I'm not waiting for it. I spent 15 years trying to earn a place I already deserved. I don't need his permission anymore. I am Catherine Campbell, Lieutenant Colonel daughter, and finally free.